Three friends boarded Disney's Galactic Starcruiser to seek their destiny and emerged as heroes of the Halcyon.
Bright suns, everyone, and welcome to Heroes of the Halcyon, the best, and to the best of our knowledge, only Galactic Starcruiser Superfan podcast. I'm Galactic Starcruiser Superfan Christine, and with me are
Superfan Martin
and Superfan Drew.
Well, this week's episode, we are featuring a friend of the podcast, Mike Celestino. He's the editorial director for Star Wars content and lead Southern California reporter for laughingplace.com. He also has his own podcast, Who's the Bosk, that you can easily find out there in all the places you find your favorite podcasts, like Heroes of the Halcyon. But before we jump into that, Martin, tell us a little story about Halcyon today.
Something really fun happened where the Visual Effects Society holds their annual awards show in February. And the Galactic Starcruiser Experience actually got nominated for outstanding visual effects in a special venue project. So you can kind of see that, there's visual effects in films and TV, and there's actually visual effects that you have to implement in a live setting. So outstanding visual effects in a special venue project, boy, this is tailor-made for the Galactic Starcruiser. But there were two other, Disney projects that did get nominated for the same award that I do think are worthy of recognition, is the Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind in the Epcot Park, and then the Worlds of Marvel Avengers Quantum Encounter aboard the Disney Wish cruise ship got nominated for this. But if you can think about all of the live action special effects that are happening on board Galactic Starcruiser, it's easy to see how they got this nomination. Just Rey's live lightsaber alone seems to be like a fantastic reason why they should win this award.
And some of the footage that you have on the bridge, without giving any spoilers away, some of the stuff that's on the bridge, the screen that you see, that's all spectacular as well.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as we're concerned, they've already won.
Sure.
Well, we'll find out for sure on February 15th, the annual VES Awards. So here's hoping our vote, of course, goes to the incredible team for Galactic Starcruiser.
The other thing I'll mention before we get started is that if you're looking to support what we're doing here on our podcast, the best way to do it is to go on Apple or Spotify and leave a 5-star review. That really does help people find the podcast when they're out there looking for things to listen to. The other thing you can do is visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/heroes of the Halcyon.
So today we bring Mike back to talk about two limited comic series from Marvel, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser Halcyon Legacy. Both series expand the universe of Galaxy's Edge Batuu and your voyage on the Halcyon. You're introduced to some new characters, as well as enjoying a trip down memory lane with some of your old favorites. So let's jump in.
Hey, Future Drew here. I wanted to break in really quickly to let you know that this conversation is somewhat abridged. In this episode, we'll talk about the two comic book series and give you our thoughts and impressions of both of them. In the full conversation that we actually recorded, we really dove into the comics and gave nearly full breakdowns of each issue. To make the episode today a bit easier to listen to, we made the decision to lift those breakdowns out and into a bonus episode that will drop next week on Tuesday. That episode will be just the rundowns of each comic, so you won't have to listen to the content in this episode again on Tuesday. Enjoy our conversation.
Well, Mike, thank you for joining us this week. It's good to see you again.
Absolutely. Happy to be back. Glad to be able to talk some more Galactic Starcruiser and Galaxy's Edge with you guys.
So it's been a little while since we talked. What have you been up to, and what's Laughing Place been up to in the last, 6 to 8 months?
Well, you know what? The holiday season and the Halloween season was really, really busy for me and for laughingplace.com, just nonstop from the summer through the fall, through the beginning of the Christmas season. But then if you know the theme park industry or the theme park news industry, like November is the holiday season. And then once we get into December, we don't really have that much to talk about because we've already covered the holiday celebrations at the theme parks. There wasn't really, as far as like Star Wars stuff. I mean, we had Willow, the series coming out from Lucasfilm. So I did cover that. I wrote reviews every week for that series, but there wasn't, after Andor ended, there wasn't a lot of Star Wars content coming out. So I kind of had a little bit of a break in late December, early January, but now I've really been getting back into it. Very excited I covered the technical rehearsals of Super Nintendo World at Universal Studios Hollywood. So that was very exciting. And then just 2 days ago, I was at Disney California Adventure for their Lunar New Year celebration. And then this coming week is the big Disney 100 media event and the opening of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway at Disneyland, which is big theme park stuff happening at the beginning of this year. As far as Star Wars goes, Bad Batch is on right now, the second season of Lucasfilm's animated series. I've been reviewing that over at Laughing Place, and Who's the Boss? My podcast is back for its fourth season, which is crazy to say. And we are talking about the Bad Batch right now until Mandalorian starts at the beginning of March.
Luckily, there's back to back to back to back. And
Yes.
you also did a lot of coverage of Andor, as I recall, when it was on the air. So,
yes, we talked about every episode of Andor. That was a lot of fun. And we had a good, 12 episode run of that show. And then Bad Batch is 16 episodes. So there's just a lot of Star Wars content coming out. And those are going to be overlapping because Mandalorian starts before Bad Batch ends. Those are going to overlap for, I think, at least a month. So that'll be a lot to talk about.
And something that Mike did that really was the epitome of Galactic Starcruiser fandom right from the jump is he was on one of the very, very earliest cruises, and he did a feature-length series of webisodes that created he created a character, Lodico Fenman, that actually started off the Starcruiser. He had an adventure on the Starcruiser. Really cool thing. It's called Antiquities. It's on laughingplace.com. It's 5 episodes. Absolutely, definitely check that out.
Yeah, and I know you talked a lot about it in our previous episode, Mike, that you were on with us earlier this year. But what was your motivation for doing that?
I wanted to find a way to approach covering the Galactic Starcruiser for my job at Laughing Place that would lean into the concept of the immersive nature of the Galactic Starcruiser. So I knew that you could theoretically create your own character and go aboard the ship and act as though you exist within the Star Wars universe. So that's what I did and tried to commit to it as much as I possibly could. I lived almost every waking moment during that trip as Lodico Fendan and reacted to things as he would and documented it thanks to my coworker, Jeremiah Good, who joined me on that voyage and was my cameraman for the little mockumentary that we made. And then also because I tend to overthink things, I also wrote and directed a prologue chapter and a epilogue chapter that kind of introduce and wrap up the story for Lodico before and after his journey, giving him a reason to go on the Halcyon to Batu, and then basically telling what happens after the story wraps up.
Yeah, and to go along with that, there's also the story that you had written prior to even all of that.
That's right. Yes, I did write a prose short story about Lodico's youth when he was working as sort of an intern at the Imperial Museum on Coruscant, because he is like roughly my age around the time of the sequel trilogy. I just kind of rewound time and figured out where he would have been around the fall of the Empire and wrote that story. It actually takes place right around the end of Return of the Jedi would be the period during which that story is set.
And where can people find that story, Mike?
That's also on laughingplace.com. If you just search for Lodico Fendan or Antiquities, those should come up on Laughing Place.
The Lodico whole story and the way you executed the story, it was so motivating to me as seeing how far could this rabbit hole go in character creation. It really was. And it really encouraged me. I mean, I wrote a very significant backstory because I was like, look what he's accomplished.
It encouraged all three of us, actually. I mean, we all did this. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was so much fun to just kind of deconstruct these moments and say, okay, how do I want to approach my character in the interactions on the Starcruiser and then work that backwards into a story. This was really something cool. So anyone that really wants to take a deep dive into character creation for Starcruiser, Antiquities is absolutely a great place to start.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I really love about your videos, Mike, is you capture immediately part of what makes the Starcruiser experience so amazing. There's a moment, and this isn't a spoiler for the experience or for your video series, but there's a moment when you're in the Crown of Corellia dining room, and I believe it was Sammy who runs by, and he looks and goes, "Oh wait, you're the antiquities guy, right?" "Yeah." And you nod, and you hadn't talked to Sammy yet, so that was the moment, and we see it in your eyes where you realize that the characters, the actors had been reading your materials and had kind of digested that and incorporated it in the story. And that's when you, Lodico, became a part of the story. And again, you see that wash over your face in that instant. And it was just fabulous.
Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, definitely a highlight of the trip.
And I don't want to, this is not a spoiler, but it was something really fun that I want to shout out. In the first episode, before he gets on the Halcyon, they went and actually found a shooting location for The Mandalorian and shot a segment in a very recognizable locale. Again, I'm not going to spoil. Go check it out for yourselves, but super fun to see. And in fact, Lodico was so instrumental in my creation for my character. I put a Lodico cameo in my fan film for George Sakul's journey toward the Starcruiser, and it's just what other piece of Star Wars allows you to go in that direction, to be a part of it yourself.
That would be no other piece.
Yeah.
Martin, just for the record.
Yep.
Isn't it crazy? Now we're in a period of time where there's overlapping Star Wars projects. It still kind of blows my mind.
It is not a dark time in the rebellion. That is for sure.
It's going to be a fun year for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know it's going to be busy for us too, but I can only imagine what it's like to try to. You probably want to go, come on, Lucasfilm, can't you slow down just a little?
Or at least
I
even
don't
it
mind
out.
it. I will say, since we are talking about comic books today, there are weeks where I'm thinking, how can they churn out this many Star Wars comics? This is the most, this period, the last like 6 months, has been the most quantity-wise, the most constant stream of Star Wars comic books that there has ever been. There have been weeks where we've gotten 4 or 5 new Star Wars comics in 1 week. And part of my job is to read and review them all, which is great. I love that part of my job, but it can be overwhelming. And sometimes I'll have to split them up between multiple days because I can't consume them all and write reviews of them in one day. So both love it and do feel a little swamped sometimes.
So, Mike, what are your favorite comics right now that you've been reading?
I got to say, Cavan Scott's Star Wars, The High Republic comic book hasn't ever really let me down. I'm a big fan of his writing, and it's just as good right now as when it started back in 2020. They're in phase 2 of The High Republic, which has rewound time another 150 years. So you're getting even further back in the Star Wars timeline. And the current era of the High Republic is focused on the planet of Jeddah from Rogue One. And that location is just so fascinating to me because it's got all these different Force religions in the same place, and they're all kind of butting heads. So you get to find out more about how different people worship the Force and utilize the Force, and then how they get along or don't get along within that, Jeddah city, the ancient city, which is basically the Jerusalem of the Star Wars galaxy. So very, very interesting stuff from Cavan Scott.
Awesome.
I imagine we'll be hearing more about Jeddah in just a bit, as a matter of fact.
Yes, there is an issue of the Galaxy's Edge comic where we visit Jeddah too.
Well, let's actually pivot then and get starting to talk about the main topic we're going to be discussing today is the 2 different series that Marvel did. They did a Halcyon Legacy series that was a 5-issue series that was exclusively about Galactic Starcruiser, the surrounding stories, the surrounding characters. And then they also did a 5-episode series based on Galaxy's Edge, kind of expanding that lore, those characters. Both of this series, the Halcyon Legacy and the Galaxy's Edge series, were done by the writer Ethan Sachs and the artist Will Sliney. Really cool art style too. I mean, the covers are of course done by different people throughout the runs, but I thought the art style was really cool. But the way that they expanded the story, I thought was really interesting.
So as you guys saw on Twitter, I went into my Star Wars comic box and dug up all 10 issues of the titles we're talking about today. I was really happy to revisit these actually, because when the Galaxy's Edge comics started coming out, I believe it was prior to Galaxy's Edge actually opening in the park. And the same was true for Halcyon Legacy. So now it's fun to go back and reread these with the knowledge that we have of the area in the parks and the Halcyon itself, the Galactic Starcruiser.
Yeah, it's fun to think about. With these comic books, the artists don't always have the exact photo
Right.
reference. I mean, if you remember in the original 1980 Empire Strikes Back adaptation for Marvel, the first run of the comic, Yoda did not look anything whatsoever like Yoda did in the actual film. Like, not even the same color.
Not
He
even the
wasn't
same
even green.
species.
Yeah,
Really.
it was completely different. It was done off some conceptual art. So again, it's just kind of interesting that the artists do kind of have to fill in some gaps and whatnot.
I will say that I noticed both when I first read this comic and this time going through it, that in the first 2 issues of Halcyon Legacy, I believe Will Sliney had a very limited amount of information to go on, because you see the bridge, which looks similar to the way it does in reality, and a couple other like hallways and stuff, but you don't see really any big expansive rooms until issue 3. And this my guess, and I would love to talk to Will Sliney about this and ask him if this is accurate, but my guess is around when he was drawing issue number 3 is when he first started getting images of the big atrium, because then you see, okay, that's the atrium that I've stood in myself, and that's accurate to what it looks like in reality. So I'm guessing he was limited in the amount of info he had up until that point, and that's probably around when the media previews would have started.
So to give folks a kind of just a broad idea of what the reference point is for the comic series, the core series does take place actually a month before the Galactic Starcruiser 275th voyage that we all go on.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a lot of flashbacks in every single issue to talk about, filling in the gaps from even centuries past. I mean, they go through pieces between episodes 2 and 3. They talk about, the distant past, different entities owning the Halcyon. We'll chat about that, but it really did fill in a lot of information. But the core wraparound stories do take place between episodes 8 and 9, just like the Galactic Starcruiser event that we go on. So that's 34 ABY, 34 years after the Battle of Yavin.
So like Martin had mentioned, in the Halcyon Legacy, it does have this anthology feel to it. When you were reading it and even rereading it, Mike, what was your feelings on that piece of the story?
So actually, both the Halcyon Legacy and the Galaxy's Edge comic have a similar structure where the overarching narrative is set in the quote unquote present between episodes 8 and 9. And then we flash back to earlier points in the Star Wars timeline. The difference between the two comics is in Galaxy's Edge, the flashbacks are mostly set off the planet of Batuu in different locations. But in the Halcyon Legacy comic, all the flashbacks are actually set on the Halcyon. So to me, that was a bonus. That was an advantage that the Halcyon Legacy comic had over the Galaxy's Edge. Because when I dive into the Galaxy's Edge comic, I remember when it was coming out being a little frustrated by this, but I wanted to spend all my time on Batuu. And then they were flashing back to other planets. I was like, I could get that from any Star Wars material. But I enjoy the anthology aspect of it, especially because it allows us to visit all these different points in the Star Wars timeline and see a bunch of different familiar Star Wars characters and meet new Star Wars characters as well. So I really like that aspect of it.
One thing that I was interested in my rereading is, because I reread everything last night also in preparation, but I had read both series several months ago. Every time I saw a character's name in bold letters, I would immediately flash over to Wikipedia and type in and go, okay, this guy was a Jedi during the High Republic. Oh, okay, I'm not as familiar with Clone Wars and Rebels, so this is obviously a character who was on Clone Wars. Did you enjoy that aspect of it, Mike?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I love the interconnected nature of the current era of Star Wars storytelling. I almost wish it were more interconnected, and I know people have called it like fan service and stuff like that when familiar characters pop up and you're able to make those connections between certain media and other releases in the Star Wars current canon. But it's just one of my absolute favorite things about consuming Star Wars these days.
Well, I can see where it would be challenging in other stories where you would feel like it was fan service, but I almost think that with Halcyon Legacy, the Chandrila star line, it just makes it feel like that particular ship is so critical to
Yeah.
all of that world because there is so many interactions on that ship, and it makes sense. Like Martin had said, how the ship changes who owns it during different period of time, and it just made it feel like it was even more important than what you realize just getting on the
Yeah.
Halcyon.
There's even that moment in the Halcyon Legacy comic where they reference the events of the Star Wars, The Princess and the Scoundrel novel, where Han and Leia had their honeymoon on the Halcyon. And, people complained, as they do. People like to complain when they announced The Princess and the Scoundrel and that it would tie into the Galactic Starcruiser. But again, I just get a kick out of that kind of stuff. And I loved the even more meta and synergistic nature of referencing that novel in this comic book. It just makes the whole thing feel more connected.
So, Mike, now that we've kind of wrapped up a little bit about Halcyon Legacy, what did you think of the comic series itself as a reader of a voracious reader and reviewer of all the other media?
I liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I think it is definitely targeted at families. And I kind of wrote this in my reviews as I was reading and reviewing these comics as they were coming out. I think it's targeted at not just younger audiences, but for families to enjoy together, either before you've boarded the Galactic Starcruiser or after your trip. You could pick this up and revisit those locations, or it could prepare you in advance for what the locations that you might experience, some of the characters that you might meet on your voyage. And it's just like you were talking about earlier, it's just a good way to feel more connected to the larger Star Wars universe. And I think it definitely works on that level.
Oh, I think it works spectacularly on that level. And the other thing that I found in my second reading is I enjoyed, much like going on the Halcyon a couple of times, I found my second way through more rewarding than the first.
Yeah.
Because, it was fun to see not only, I was there, I stood where that Rancor stood. There was that, but the other thing that was nice was the story. I started to see the connections a little bit more between the various pieces and parts and kind of appreciate the comic for that.
The other question I have for you guys, because you've been on the Halcyon more recently than I have they started selling this in that little exit gift shop that you go through? Is the collected version of this comic book available there? Because if not, that feels like a missed opportunity to me, because this would I feel like this would fly off the shelves.
Yeah.
If
I
you
don't
were
remember
selling
seeing
this.
it. That's a good point.
Yeah, because I mean, both this and the Galaxy's Edge comic book have a trade paperback. Yeah, wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
I thought for sure this was intended. Like, I thought, okay, they're doing this so you can sell it as people are leaving. And you see, there's a whole comic book that tells you the story of the Halcyon. I'll definitely get a copy of that. Like, why aren't they selling this there? And I have the same complaint or the same observation about the Galaxy's Edge comic book. I remember the individual issues popping up at Disneyland, but I've never seen the collected trade paperback version. And you'd think, this is a no-brainer, guys. You would be these copies would be flying off the shelves if they were available near those experiences.
You know what? Actually, now that you mention it, I think I did see it, and it was right next to the Gaia CD. Oh, wait, they don't have that either.
I want a Gaia vinyl. I want a DJ Rex playlist vinyl and a Gaia vinyl.
Yes.
Disney, if you're listening, please. Next D23 Expo.
It's funny, and in case people didn't pick up on my sarcasm, they don't have either of those pieces of media. But yes, this is an obvious thing. They should totally have this outside, because I already have it, and I probably would have bought it again. Well, what did you think of the comic book, Christine?
Well, like I said, I like the idea that it shows you how long, you get on board and it says it's the 275th anniversary. But this really gives you an idea of the importance of the Halcyon in the entire Star Wars story. As far as a comic is concerned, I didn't enjoy the writing piece of it. I thought it was a little jarring to try to follow all of the stories. I appreciate the flashback idea, but I think it made it difficult to kind of piece all of it together. Like I almost wish that there was a flashback like maybe the first 2 episodes were flashbacks where D3 is, explaining to the granddaughter how important the Halcyon is and how, all the history behind it, and then go back to Crimson Jack and Lenka and Kevin and kind of follow that story through. The kind of back and forth, it just seemed like rushed, I think is a good way to put it.
What did you think about that, Mike, since you've obviously read so many more of the comics?
I did get a little mixed up, like, okay, where are we exactly in the timeline right now? So I can see that as being a point of confusion for sure. And I definitely had a similar experience. But overall, I think I appreciated getting to visit all the different eras in the Star Wars timeline via the Halcyon. I'm not sure of a better way to do it. I think I like Christine's idea, but at the same time, I did want to see, I love that we got to see the High Republic. We got to see the prequel era. We got to see the original trilogy era and then the New Republic era. I don't know. I'm not sure if there's a better way to go about it, but I think for what it is, I enjoyed the approach.
Yeah, I'll say, as obviously a huge fan of the Starcruiser and the Halcyon itself, I love that aspect. So would I recommend this? Yeah, they totally should be selling this outside. I mean, I can't believe that it's not there. And if it is, please let us know, listeners. You can send us an email at heroesofthehalcyon@gmail.com. But as far as the quality goes, you mentioned fan service earlier, Mike, and this there's a line where it's obvious fan service, and this really gets really close to that line, and sometimes crosses it a bit much, in my opinion. But I definitely liked it.
I do agree that it approaches the line, but like I said, I think it is intended for a younger audience and a family audience. So those people picking up this comic are probably going to want to see Anakin and Padme on the ship.
Sure.
These are huge, major characters in the Star Wars franchise. So I think you do kind of need that connection to give the Halcyon a context within the larger picture.
Sure.
Yeah. And for me, even though I wouldn't give it a 10 out of 10, I would still definitely recommend it to somebody who is getting on the Halcyon or has just gotten off the Halcyon. Because again, I do feel like it gives you a stronger tie to the importance of the Halcyon, and just adding in characters that you're familiar with just makes it that much more personal.
Oh, yeah.
I think.
Yeah. What did you think, Martin?
I liked it. Again, I do think, I think I read more comics on a general basis than most folks. So I didn't have as much of a problem following, because it is kind of a comic structure to jump there. But yeah, I mean, I can see why someone just picking this up would have a hard time following it. But at the same time, I still consider it a win. If it was a thumbs up or thumbs down from me, it would still get a pretty enthusiastic thumbs up, just because it fills in a lot of these gaps. And cool. I just keep thinking back to the whiteboard meetings where they're like, we have to think of connections between the media and the physical location, and how fun that must have been for them.
Yeah.
We just need to put a mark on the stairs here and write it in there. We got to put a door here and mark it down. I just that whiteboard must have been just such a joy for, I'm assuming, the story group to put out.
Speaking of those connections, I don't know if I don't expect that you guys have listened to my interview with author Beth Revis, who wrote that Princess and the Scoundrel novel about Han and Leia's honeymoon. But she told me that she had based the scene where Han writes his initials in the engineering room on the pipe there. She based that around the photo that I tweeted of me against those initials, because she hadn't seen them before.
Oh, that's cool.
And I was the first person
awesome
to tweet them out. And I was like, wow, it's as close as I've gotten to having any kind of impact on Star Wars canon. So I'll take it. I was so thrilled.
You should.
To hear
you
that.
should take it. I very much remember that, actually, when you recorded that. And I think that's just another example of why reading this comic is so much fun, because while we can't quite piece ourselves as much as you did, Mike, we certainly can see ourselves sitting in that same spot that, this is where Anakin and Padme were doing their, it's just super cool.
But what's interesting is, as much as this does break open the lore and add to it, there's still so much more. Like in our last episode, we were speaking with some of the folks who had just gone on the ship, and they were talking about going to the Spirits of Adventure segment on day 2, where the taste test thing inside the Sublight Lounge, and they were talking about how the chemist there was talking about the history of the Halcyon and Captain Keevan's history. And there was some unknown information to them that hadn't been divulged anywhere else. So I want to know, where is this Bible? Oh, yeah. Where is this character Bible and how can I get to it?
Yeah.
Let's pivot away now from the actual Halcyon Legacy comic. And there was another 5-issue Marvel comic book series for Galaxy's Edge that kind of took those characters, that location, those setups, and kind of expanded them as well.
It served a similar role in the corporate hypermedia giant of Disney that the Halcyon Legacy did for the Galactic Starcruiser.
Synergy. But this was a lot of fun. I did like this one. I thought that as far as a lore is concerned, I actually thought it was added quite a bit. The first issue, of course, understandably gets the biggest significant cameos, that being Han Solo and Chewbacca.
Gotta go with the big guys first. If this was a regular comic book, it would have been Wolverine, right?
And it was kind of fun. I mean, Drew, we were talking about this earlier, and it was kind of interesting to see how big of a role Doc Ondar plays. And in Galaxy's Edge, you see the animatronic inside the Den of Antiquities. Super cool. We absolutely love it. But to see him play such an active role throughout this series, I thought that was really cool.
It was cool. Mike, you were reading this obviously while it was coming out. How much did you enjoy these comics as they were first published?
I really liked this comic. As you guys know, I am a big fan of Doc Ondar's Den of Antiquities. I kind of built my Galactic Starcruiser character around the Den of Antiquities, even though that's in Galaxy's Edge and not on the ship, but they are connected, and I thought it would be fun to connect them with my character as well. But my favorite thing about this comic book is that each issue kind of zooms in on one of the artifacts in Doc Ondar's Den of Antiquities and gives you the backstory of how it arrived at the shop. So I think that's a brilliant premise, and it allows us to visit different areas in the Star Wars timeline and different locations in the galaxy. And you get a little bit of lore. Like you said, we get to go to Jeddah, the Temple of the Kyber. I think seeing that for the first time, the interior of that for the first time in the canon. So a lot of very cool stuff being explored here.
And what a great reason to go into Doc Ondar's to see some of these antiquities that he has. And while you're here, if you want to drop a few credits, that would be fine too.
You can probably buy one or two of them, or maybe not the artifacts themselves, but see that holocron sitting on the shelf there. We have that in the store.
It's funny, in this comic book, there's literally Easter eggs of Easter eggs.
Yes. No, that was the great thing reading it as the issues were coming out, because you would read about the sword that is a major part of this story, and then go in and see that sword mounted on the wall in the shop. And again, you just feel that much closer to the physicality of being there and the connection to the other parts of Star Wars.
Yeah, and of course that sword featured, the character that was featured in those issues was Dr. Aphra, which is one of my favorite characters in the comic series. So it was really cool to see her worked into all of this as well.
Yeah, this conversation has kind of made me realize how badly I want a Doc Ondar toy. Like,
oh yeah.
I mean, there's
you guys will be happy to know that I broached this topic with Hasbro recently when I got to talk with their Star Wars team. I love their 3-packs that they've put out in the parks of some of the Galaxy's Edge characters, but I want to know why they haven't done a Vi Marati, Doc Ondar. I would love a Lieutenant Beck figure in the Black Series. Gosh, those would be so cool to own. So I think, they kind of implied to me in their answer that they are, they're always talking about what's next for the park. So hopefully we will get to see those eventually. I would buy those instantaneously if they came out.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
And really, they wouldn't be that hard. I mean, they've already got most of the sculpt for Doc Ondar. You got to dress him up a little bit. That's cool. Vi Marati, they've already got the body. They need to sculpt a different head and put that on. And then, of course, for Lieutenant Beck is just Admiral. The vest is a little bit, the chest piece is a little bit different, but they've got 90% of the sculpt done for that. Let's go, Hasbro. We got money. Don't you want our money? What's wrong with my money, Hasbro?
Well, Mike, what did you think of the Galaxy's Edge comic book?
Well, I would say much like the Halcyon Legacy comic, this gives you more context as to the story surrounding Black Spire Outpost and some of the characters you meet there, especially Doc Ondar, who is the central figure of the comic. I think the downside to the Galaxy's Edge comic book is that it doesn't spend all of its time on Batuu. Like I mentioned before, you are in the flashbacks, you are traveling to other planets and other locations. But I'm guessing that had a lot to do with just kind of limited information that Ethan Sachs probably had about Galaxy's Edge going into writing this comic book. I think at this point now, you could probably go and write a comic that's entirely set on Batu. I would love to see a sequel series if they wanted to go and do another volume of the Galaxy's Edge comic that's entirely in Black Spire Outpost. That's my only one real nitpick, is that I wanted to see more of Batu. Otherwise, I really enjoyed getting to visit this location and spend time with these characters, learn more about Doc Ondar in the comic world.
Oh yeah, the Doc Ondar parts were just fabulous.
I mean, is there any character that we think is underrepresented or that we'd like to see more lore from in future media?
I would love to know how Vi got to Batu. Like, what did she do just prior to, and now that she's been on Batu, what kind of things has she experienced or been a part of on Batu? And now, you could easily go back to, different parts of Batu and talk about them in great detail.
Yeah.
Delilah Dawson wrote that Black Spire novel that Vi featured in pretty prominently. But to me, Vi, there's a ton to tell there. I would love to get a 5-issue series on Vi. That's a great idea. Mike, is there any character or situation or setup that you think would be kind of fun to see in a future run?
I think I would like to see kind of a similar idea. You could do kind of an anthology style comic book miniseries, maybe about all the other shop owners on Batu. You could do one about the Toydarian toy maker. I think her name is Zabaka. Do Creature Stall. Could do Katsaka's Kettle. And you give backstories to all these characters that don't necessarily pop up when you visit the land, but they are there as part of the background lore.
I would love to see that.
I want to know what debt that droid has that he has to spin the spits at Ronto's roaster over and over.
He got
again.
a nice cameo in the Galaxy's Edge comic book selling the Ronto roasters.
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious. That made me laugh out loud.
Well, now I think would be a fantastic time to do, even if it's a one issue, a one shot of each of the characters that are on the Halcyon.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Like,
Maybe a sequel series, a Halcyon Legacy. Yeah.
Yeah, like who doesn't want to hear more about what happened to Sammy before he got on the ship? What happened to Wraith before he got on the ship?
Sandro, I'd love to know this. Where did one issue each would be a really cool 5-issue run, one each character. That'd be fantastic.
If you had to pick one character, Mike, that you would like to see that series on, who would you pick?
Oh, I think Gaia. I would say Gaia because I feel like I had the most emotional connection with that storyline during my journey. So I want to see Gaia's character fleshed out some more.
So they kind of had this decision to make with the Harmon Croy, but there's been so many actors playing these roles. How do you pick one? Do you just randomly pick one, I suppose?
Well, they did it for Harmon Croy, so they can do it for other people.
I mean, that they got to just kind of pick one representation. And I suppose, technically, is that the canon representation for that character? It's very nebulous. I mean, everything in Galactic Starcruiser, it's canon, but there is a nebulousness to the canon, which is okay.
I think really the one that I would want to see most, and I'm going to shock you, the Saja.
I would love to see who created Saja. Yeah, that's me. That's more than one issue. I would absolutely have to have a 5-issue series on the Saja. And
clearly they tie into the Guardians of the Will. I mean, they're actually kind of an analog character to the Guardians of the Will, frankly. But it'd be really good to see the connections between them.
What's kind of fascinating about the Saja to me is that they're operating openly on the Halcyon. Like you would think in the First Order era, this would not be allowed, which I suppose you could argue that the First Order era is really only starting to happen with the destruction of Hosnian Prime. I mean, before then they were a faction looking to lead, whereas they destroy Hosnian Prime, then they're firmly in charge. So this is kind of a new power dynamic in the galaxy that the First Order can call the shots. So I suppose that's technically why the Saja would have been able to operate in the open.
Sure. Well, I think this has been a very, very fun dive into the Halcyon Legacy and the Galaxy's Edge Star Wars comic book. So, Mike, thank you very much for joining us to talk about these.
Absolutely. It was great to dig up these comics and get to revisit them really my first time rereading them since I first bought them. So very cool to experience these stories again and to talk about them with you guys.
So I know you mentioned you're going to be doing reviews of Bad Batch for the next 15, 14 weeks. And of course, with The Mandalorian coming up, is there anything else exciting on the horizon for you?
Well, I would say the big thing this year, Star Wars wise, outside of the actual content itself, is going to be Star Wars Celebration London, which is coming up in just a few months in the UK. Very excited to visit from my very first time going to that city and getting to look around a bit and enjoy visiting there. And then, of course, the convention itself is going to be a blast, I'm sure. Can't wait.
Well, again, thanks so much, Mike, for hanging out with us today and going through these comics again. We absolutely enjoy going down this memory lane. And now that we've spent so much time both on the Halcyon and in Galaxy's Edge.
Thank you.
Well, how much fun is it to always talk with Mike Celestino? I mean, this guy is literally, he is a human Wikipedia. He knows.
Well, when we were first doing our character concepts for the second voyage, one of the things we threw around was whether I was going to be like an entertainment reporter for Jorg So Cool. And immediately I was like, hey, Mike, if I wanted to do this, where would I get this information from? And he immediately wrote back, that would be the HoloNet News. So, yeah.
Well, it's always fun to have him on the show, and he's just a great guy in person.
Oh, yeah. And when we were going to talk about the Halcyon Legacy comic book, immediately we were all like, oh, we totally have to get Mike on for this episode.
Yeah,
so that
absolutely.
was awesome. Oh, yeah, that was cool.
Well, Christine, we mentioned up front at the beginning of the episode that there was a giveaway this episode. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So this week, whenever you see the post for this week's episode on Instagram, make sure to comment with the word Marvel, and that will put you into a drawing for a full set of the Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser Halcyon Legacy comics. We'll do a drawing, a random drawing, and we will post the winner on Instagram.
Well, Christine, if people wanted to find us on the internet, how would they do so?
On Instagram, you can find us on Heroes of the Halcyon. On Twitter, you can find us at Halcyon_Heroes. And make sure to stay tuned to our YouTube page. We plan on doing a lot more there. Now's the time to subscribe.
You could also find us on Patreon at patreon.com/Heroes of the Halcyon.
And we love hearing about your stories from going on Galactic Starcruiser. So feel free to email us at heroesofthehalcyon@gmail.com.
Well, it is always fun to shoot the poodoo this week, last week, next week, every week. So until next episode, it's our honor. Let's raise our glasses with the Halcyon toast.
Tabuite!